Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the quiet and mysterious world of the ladies-in-waiting, the noble women who stood beside queens and princesses inside Europe's royal courts. If you enjoy calm history that helps you relax and fall asleep, please subscribe to the channel and settle in as we uncover the hidden lives of these remarkable women. Imagine waking before sunrise in a cold stone castle, where the halls are silent except for the crackling of fireplaces and the distant footsteps of guards changing shifts. Long before the queen opened her eyes, a lady-in-waiting was already awake. She carefully prepared elegant gowns, arranged precious jewelry, checked letters from noble families, and made sure everything around the royal chamber was perfect. Although history often celebrates kings, queens, and famous generals, these women quietly witnessed many of the most important moments ever to happen. Behind palace walls, a lady-in-waiting was rarely an ordinary servant. Most came from noble families and had received an education that many people of their time could only dream about. They learned how to read, write, dance gracefully, speak politely, play musical instruments, and understand the complicated rules of royal etiquette. Their parents often considered it a great honor when a daughter was invited to serve. The queen, because it strengthened family connections with the royal court and could improve the family's influence for generations. Every movement inside the palace followed strict traditions. A queen was almost never alone, and ladies-in-waiting accompanied her throughout the day. They helped her dress in layers of expensive clothing that could take nearly an hour to put on. They brushed and braided her hair, adjusted jeweled crowns, carried perfume, and stood nearby during meals, religious ceremonies, official meetings, and celebrations. Yet their responsibilities reached far beyond appearance. They became trusted listeners, loyal companions, and sometimes the only people who truly understood the private worries of a queen. While nobles argued loudly in grand halls, these women quietly observed everything. They noticed which ambassadors smiled sincerely and which hid dangerous intentions. They remembered whispered conversations, changing alliances, and family rivalries that could shape the future of entire kingdoms. Because they stood close to power without actually ruling, they often understood secrets that few others ever discovered. Many learned that silence was one of the most valuable skills anyone could possess inside a royal court. A careless sentence repeated to the wrong person could destroy reputations, ruin marriages, or even place lives in danger. So they listened carefully, spoke gently, and carried the weight of countless royal secrets without ever expecting their names to appear in history books. Despite their noble birth, life inside the palace was far from comfortable. Every action was watched, every word remembered, and every mistake could spread through the castle before the day was over. Choosing the wrong dress for a ceremony, speaking out of turn, or showing kindness to the wrong noble family could damage years of carefully built trust. Ladies-in-waiting lived under constant pressure to appear calm, graceful, and loyal no matter what they truly felt inside. Many entered the royal household while still teenagers, leaving behind their childhood homes and families. They suddenly found themselves surrounded by magnificent halls covered in colorful tapestries, glittering chandeliers, and tables filled with silver plates. Yet beneath this beauty existed endless competition. Dozens of noble women hoped to gain the queen's confidence because being her favorite companion could change an entire family's future. Friendship certainly existed, but so did jealousy. A smile offered during dinner might hide resentment, while a polite compliment could secretly be part of a larger political game. Marriage was another complicated part of their lives. Some ladies-in-waiting eventually married powerful nobles after meeting them at court, while others remained unmarried for many years because their service to the queen always came first. A few sacrificed personal happiness completely, staying beside the royal family through wars, illnesses, and heartbreaking losses. When a queen gave birth, her ladies-in-waiting, were often among the first people allowed into the royal chamber. They comforted her during painful hours, cared for newborn princes and princesses, and remained nearby during moments of both celebration and sorrow. If tragedy struck and a child did not survive, these women shared the queen's grief in silence, offering comfort without expecting recognition. During grand feasts, they stood quietly behind the royal table, ensuring every detail unfolded perfectly. During long journeys, they packed clothing, medicine, books, sewing supplies, and treasured personal belongings before dawn, traveling across muddy roads for days or even weeks. Their lives demanded patience, endurance, and absolute loyalty. Although paintings usually show them smiling in beautiful gowns, the reality was much more demanding. Behind every elegant appearance stood countless hours of preparation, responsibility, and emotional strength, making these forgotten women some of the quietest yet most essential figures in the history of Europe's royal courts. As years passed, many ladies-in-waiting discovered that serving a queen meant living through the greatest triumphs and darkest tragedies of an entire kingdom. They stood nearby when royal weddings united powerful nations and when funerals filled cathedral halls with silence. They watched young princesses leave their childhood homes to marry foreign kings, knowing they might never see their families again. Often it was the ladies-in-waiting who packed those treasured belongings, folded embroidered dresses, and quietly comforted a frightened bride before her long journey into an unfamiliar land. Once they arrived at another court, many of these women found themselves adapting to new languages, customs, and traditions almost overnight. Their loyalty was expected to remain unshaken even when everything around them had changed. Because they spent so much time beside queens, they sometimes became trusted advisors without holding any official title. A queen who doubted the intentions of a visiting ambassador might privately ask a lady-in-waiting what she had noticed during the day's conversations. Small observations could become surprisingly valuable. A nervous glance, an unexpected gift, or an unusual letter might reveal more than long political speeches. Yet wisdom alone could not always protect them. Royal courts were unpredictable, places where one change of ruler could completely transform a person's future. When a king died or a queen lost favor, entire households could disappear within days. Some ladies-in-waiting returned quietly to their family estates, while others followed their mistress into exile, imprisonment, or even danger. History remembers queens who lost their crowns, but beside many of them stood faithful companions who accepted the same uncertain fate without complaint. There were no newspapers celebrating their devotion, and few artists painted their stories. Instead, their lives survived only in scattered letters, forgotten diaries, and official records mentioning them only briefly. Modern historians often discover these women through tiny details, hidden inside palace accounts, lists of household expenses, or personal correspondence written centuries ago. Piece by piece, these forgotten fragments reveal that behind every famous queen stood a circle of intelligent, educated, and remarkably resilient women whose quiet presence helped royal courts function every single day. Their influence rarely appeared on official documents, yet it echoed through countless decisions made behind heavy wooden doors, proving that history is often shaped not only by those who wear the crown, but also by those who faithfully stand beside it. Not every lady-in-waiting served in the same way. Royal households were carefully organized, and each woman often had a different responsibility depending on her rank, experience, and the queen's personal needs. Some specialized in managing clothing and precious jewelry, making sure every gown matched the importance of a ceremony. Others supervised household accounts, organized travel, or kept detailed records of gifts exchanged between noble families. A few became trusted readers, spending quiet evenings beside the fireplace reading religious texts, poetry, or letters from distant relatives while the queen rested after a demanding day. Music also filled many royal chambers. Ladies-in-waiting frequently played the lute, harp, or virginal to entertain the queen during peaceful afternoons. They embroidered delicate fabrics, practiced elegant handwriting, and learned foreign languages so they could assist during diplomatic visits. Education was considered one of their greatest strengths because an intelligent companion could provide thoughtful conversation as well as practical help. Yet despite their refined surroundings, illness remained a constant threat. Medieval and early modern castles were often cold, damp, and poorly ventilated. Long winters brought coughs, fevers, and infections that even the wealthiest physicians struggled to cure. When sickness entered the royal household, ladies-in-waiting rarely abandoned their duties. They stayed beside the queen, prepared herbal remedies, changed linens, and spent sleepless nights caring for someone they deeply respected. Their courage was quiet rather than dramatic, shown through countless small acts of devotion that rarely appeared in official chronicles. During times of plague or political unrest, remaining at court could become dangerous, but many chose loyalty over personal safety. Some accompanied queens on hurried escapes from rebellious cities, carrying only the essentials, while leaving behind luxurious chambers that had once seemed permanent. Others protected royal children during uncertain times, keeping them calm while chaos unfolded outside palace walls. Looking back today, it becomes clear that these women were far more than elegant, figures standing in the background of famous paintings. They were organizers, caretakers, advisors, witnesses, and loyal friends, whose steady presence helped royal families endure moments of celebration, uncertainty, and loss. Although history often remembers the crowns, the battles, and the kings, the quiet strength of the ladies-in-waiting remained woven into nearly every chapter of courtly life, even when their own names slowly faded into the silence of the centuries. As the centuries passed, the role of the lady-in-waiting slowly changed. But one thing remained constant. Absolute loyalty was expected at all times. A queen depended on the women around her not only for practical help, but also for emotional support. Royal life could be surprisingly lonely. Every conversation with foreign ambassadors carried political consequences. Every public appearance was judged by thousands of eyes, and even simple family moments were carefully observed by members of the court. In such a world, a trusted companion became more valuable than expensive jewels. Some ladies-in-waiting remained beside the same queen for decades, watching children grow into rulers and witnessing generations of history unfold before them. They celebrated royal births with quiet joy, comforted grieving mothers after heartbreaking losses, and stood respectfully beside the throne during magnificent coronations. Yet they also experienced fear. News of rebellion, assassination attempts, or invading armies could spread through the palace in a matter of hours. During these tense moments, the castle transformed from a place of ceremony into a place of uncertainty. Valuable documents were hidden, treasures were packed into wooden chests, and royal families prepared for journeys that might begin before sunrise. Ladies-in-waiting worked tirelessly through the night, organizing clothing, protecting precious belongings, and ensuring that frightened children remained calm. Despite the confusion surrounding them, their composure often helped prevent panic from spreading throughout the royal household. Even during peaceful years, their daily routine demanded endless patience. They attended church services with the queen, accompanied her on hunting trips, garden walks, musical performances, and diplomatic receptions where every smile and every bow followed. Centuries-old traditions. They learned to recognize the personalities of countless nobles, remembering family histories, titles, and proper forms of address so that no embarrassing mistake would offend an important guest. Such knowledge required remarkable memory and constant attention to detail. Although they rarely commanded armies or signed official decrees, their influence quietly reached into every corner of palace life. Many famous rulers trusted the judgment of the women who stood closest to them, listening to honest opinions that others were too afraid to express. Because these conversations happened behind closed doors, history often overlooked their importance. Today, when historians carefully examine surviving letters and household records, they discover countless examples showing that these women were far more than elegant. Attendants, they were dependable. Confidants whose intelligence, discretion, and unwavering dedication helped sustain royal courts through peace, celebration, hardship, and change, leaving behind a legacy that deserves far greater recognition than it has received. For so many centuries, as royal courts became larger and more elaborate during the Renaissance and into the early modern period, the expectations placed upon ladies-in-waiting continued to grow. Magnificent palaces glittered with gold, crystal, and priceless works of art. Yet behind the elegance existed an exhausting rhythm that rarely slowed. Every celebration, banquet, diplomatic reception, and religious festival required weeks of preparation. Ladies-in-waiting inspected wardrobes, arranged seating plans, coordinated servants, and ensured that every detail reflected the dignity of the crown. A single misplaced decoration or forgotten guest could become the subject of gossip throughout the kingdom. Their ability to remain calm under constant pressure made them indispensable members of the royal household. Many also became highly skilled observers of human nature. After years at court, they could often recognize ambition, jealousy, kindness, or deceit simply by watching how nobles greeted one another across a crowded hall. They understood that the loudest voices were not always the most powerful, and that a quiet conversation in a palace corridor could influence the future. More than an impressive speech delivered before hundreds of people, this awareness taught them to move carefully through a world where trust was precious and betrayal could appear without warning. Some ladies-in-waiting formed lifelong friendships with the queens they served. Together they shared private prayers before important ceremonies, comforting conversations during difficult evenings, and peaceful moments spent reading beside candlelight while storms echoed outside the palace walls. These simple moments rarely appeared in official chronicles, yet they revealed the deeply human side of royal life. Even queens needed someone who would speak honestly, rather than flatter them for personal gain. In return, a grateful queen sometimes rewarded loyal service with land, generous gifts, or support for an honorable marriage. Still, not every story ended happily. Political revolutions, changing dynasties, and civil wars swept away many royal households. Women who had spent decades surrounded by luxury suddenly found themselves leaving familiar palaces with only a few personal belongings. Some followed their queens into exile across distant borders, refusing to abandon them despite uncertainty and hardship. Their loyalty was measured not by titles or wealth, but by the choices they made when everything they had known began to disappear. Centuries later, these forgotten companions remind us that history is not built only by famous rulers whose names fill textbooks. It is also shaped by devoted individuals whose quiet service, wisdom, and steadfast presence helped guide kingdoms through moments of triumph, sorrow, and profound change. Even if the world remembered the crown far more clearly than the faithful women who stood just a few steps behind it. As the age of absolute monarchies slowly gave way to a changing Europe, the traditional position of the lady-in-waiting also began to evolve. New ideas about government, education, and society spread across the continent, and royal courts gradually became less isolated from the outside world. Even so, inside palace walls, centuries-old traditions remained surprisingly strong. Every morning still began with carefully planned routines. The Queen's schedule was arranged almost to the minute, and her ladies-in-waiting ensured that every appointment flowed smoothly from one to the next. They welcomed distinguished visitors, prepared private chambers for confidential meetings, and quietly reminded the Queen of names, family connections, and important events that might otherwise be forgotten. Their remarkable memory was one of their greatest talents. In an age before telephones or computers, remembering hundreds of noble families, their titles, marriages, and political loyalties was an essential skill. During formal ceremonies, they also became guardians of etiquette. They knew exactly who should enter a room first, where each guest should stand, how deeply one should bow, and even which words were appropriate for every occasion. A small mistake in protocol could easily offend a powerful noble or visiting monarch. Because of this, younger ladies-in-waiting spent years learning these complicated customs from older, more experienced women. The palace itself became their classroom, where every day offered another lesson in diplomacy, patience, and self-control. Yet beneath the polished surface, they remained ordinary human beings with hopes and fears of their own. Some dreamed of returning home to peaceful country estates after years of service. Others hoped to marry, raise families, and leave court life behind forever. A few, however, discovered that the palace had become the only home they truly knew. After decades spent serving one queen, the rhythms of royal life felt as natural as breathing. When their mistress passed away or a new ruler took the throne, many experienced a deep sense of loss, almost as though an entire chapter of their own lives had quietly come to an end. Today, museums preserve elegant gowns, jeweled fans, handwritten letters, and beautifully embroidered gloves that once belonged to these remarkable women. Historians carefully study such objects because they reveal details that official records often ignored. A simple note folded between the pages of a prayer book or a faded diary entry can tell us far more about daily life than a grand royal proclamation. Through these surviving fragments, the voices of the ladies-in-waiting slowly return, reminding us that behind every glittering throne stood women whose loyalty, intelligence, compassion, and quiet resilience helped shape the story of Europe's royal courts in ways that are only now beginning to be fully appreciated. By the 19th century, the world surrounding Europe's royal courts was changing faster than ever before. Railways connected distant cities, newspapers carried stories across entire countries within days, and ordinary people became increasingly interested in the private lives of kings and queens. For the first time, the women who served beside the throne occasionally found themselves becoming subjects of public curiosity, although their names still appeared far less often than those of monarchs. Letters, memoirs, and newspaper reports began revealing small glimpses of their daily routines. Even then, discretion remained their greatest responsibility. A trusted lady-in-waiting was expected to guard the royal family's privacy above everything else. Personal conversations, family disagreements, moments of grief, and even joyful celebrations were never meant to leave the palace walls. Breaking that trust could end a career that had taken decades to build. This unspoken promise of silence became one of the defining qualities of their profession. At the same time, technology slowly transformed palace life. Oil lamps gave way to brighter lighting. Improved heating made winters more comfortable, and faster methods of communication reduced the long periods of uncertainty that earlier generations had endured. Yet, despite these modern improvements, much of a lady-in-waiting's work remained deeply personal. Machines could not comfort a nervous queen before an important ceremony, calm an anxious royal child, or provide thoughtful companionship during lonely evenings. Those responsibilities still depended on patience, empathy, and genuine human understanding. Some ladies-in-waiting served multiple generations of the same royal family, first assisting a young princess, then standing beside her after she became queen, and later helping care for the next generation of princes and princesses. Their memories stretched across decades, making them living witnesses to changing fashions, political reforms, royal weddings, state funerals, and moments of celebration that shaped the identity of entire nations. Because they experienced history from such an intimate perspective, many left behind diaries that historians treasure today. These writings rarely focused on great battles or dramatic speeches. Instead, they described ordinary mornings, quiet conversations, unexpected acts of kindness, and the emotions hidden beneath formal ceremonies. Through these gentle observations, we begin to understand that royal life was not simply a story of crowns and castles. It was also a story of friendship, loyalty, responsibility, and countless unseen individuals whose quiet dedication allowed the monarchy to function day after day. Among them, the ladies-in-waiting occupied a unique place, standing close enough to witness history unfold with their own eyes while remaining humble enough to let others receive the glory, leaving behind a legacy that continues to fascinate historians centuries after their footsteps faded from the palace corridors. Although the traditional image of the lady-in-waiting belongs to the grand courts of Europe, similar roles existed in many royal households around the world. Whether in France, England, Spain, Austria, or Russia, queens depended upon trusted women who understood both ceremony and compassion. While the clothing, language, and customs differed from one kingdom to another, the heart of the position remained remarkably similar. These women devoted their lives to serving someone whose every decision could influence thousands or even millions of people. In the British royal court, for example, ladies-in-waiting carefully organized daily engagements, accompanied the queen during official ceremonies, and represented dignity through flawless manners. In the French court at Versailles, life was even more elaborate. Strict etiquette governed almost every movement. A queen might be surrounded by dozens of noblewomen, each assigned a particular responsibility, from presenting gloves to arranging chairs or assisting with formal introductions. Even the simple act of handing the queen a cup could follow a precise order, based on noble rank. To modern eyes, these traditions may seem unusual, yet they reflected a society where ceremony itself symbolized stability and authority. During long evenings, when public duties had finally ended, the atmosphere inside the private apartments often became much quieter. Candles flickered gently against painted ceilings, while ladies-in-waiting embroidered delicate patterns, repaired gowns, or read aloud from books of history, poetry, and religion. Sometimes music echoed softly through the chambers as someone played the harp or piano, creating a peaceful ending to an exhausting day. These moments remind us that behind the formal image of royalty were ordinary people who laughed together, shared stories, worried about loved ones, and searched for small moments of comfort. Over time, many ladies-in-waiting developed extraordinary emotional strength. They learned to remain composed during celebrations and equally calm during moments of heartbreak. They comforted queens who mourned family members, reassured nervous princesses before royal weddings, and quietly supported elderly monarchs as age gradually slowed them down. Rarely did they expect praise or recognition for these acts of kindness. Their greatest reward was often the trust placed in them by the person they served. Today, when visitors walk through magnificent palaces that have become museums, it is easy to admire glittering crowns, luxurious furniture, and breathtaking architecture. Yet without the quiet dedication of the women who cared for every detail behind the scenes, daily life inside those royal residences would have been far more difficult. Their footsteps may have disappeared from polished palace floors centuries ago, but their loyalty, patience, and quiet influence remain woven into the remarkable story of Europe's royal courts. As the 20th century approached, the position of the lady-in-waiting gradually became less political and more ceremonial. Yet it never lost its importance. Monarchies across Europe were adapting to a rapidly changing world shaped by industry, science, and growing democratic movements. Royal families appeared more frequently in photographs than paintings, and newspapers eagerly reported every public event. Even with this increasing attention, the women serving beside the Queen remained largely invisible to the public. That was exactly how the royal household preferred it. Their role was never to attract attention, but to ensure that the monarch could perform every duty with confidence and dignity. During official tours, they carefully coordinated travel schedules, inspected accommodations before the royal party arrived, and confirmed that every ceremony followed local customs. If unexpected problems appeared, they quietly solved them before anyone noticed. A delayed carriage, a missing document, or a last-minute change in the program required quick thinking and absolute calm. Their ability to adapt without creating panic became one of the reasons they earned such deep trust. Beyond public ceremonies, they often played another equally valuable role as guardians of family tradition. They remembered birthdays, anniversaries, favorite flowers, treasured family recipes, and customs that had been passed from one generation to the next. These small details helped preserve a sense of continuity even as the outside world changed dramatically. Young princes and princesses frequently grew up recognizing familiar ladies-in-waiting almost as members of the extended household. They offered encouragement during lessons, comfort after disappointments, and gentle guidance about the expectations that came with royal life. Many future monarchs spent their childhood surrounded by these dependable women, whose patience quietly shaped their character. Some ladies-in-waiting eventually wrote memoirs late in life, but even then they carefully protected private conversations, revealing only enough to help future generations understand the atmosphere of court life. Their stories speak less about luxury than about discipline, responsibility, and unwavering dedication. They describe long hours, constant attention to detail, and the emotional strength required to stand beside someone carrying the weight of a nation. Looking back across centuries, it becomes clear that the history of queens cannot truly be separated from the women who faithfully accompanied them every day. Although their portraits may hang in smaller galleries and their names may appear only briefly in historical records, their influence reached far beyond what official titles could measure. They proved that loyalty expressed through quiet service can leave a lasting mark on history, even when the world remembers only the crown and forgets the hands that helped, supported every single day. By the modern era, the title of lady-in-waiting had become far less common than it once was, yet its centuries of tradition continued to influence royal households. Some monarchies reduced the size of their courts, while others modernized the responsibilities of those serving the royal family. Even as official duties changed, one timeless principle remained unchanged. The monarch should never face the burdens of public life completely alone. Trusted companions still offered guidance, organization, and quiet reassurance during moments of uncertainty. Looking back through history, it becomes clear that the greatest strength of these women was not wealth, beauty, or noble birth, but reliability. They were expected to arrive before everyone else, remain until every responsibility had been completed, and perform their duties without seeking applause. Their work required remarkable discipline. A forgotten invitation, an incorrectly prepared gown, or a misunderstanding during an important ceremony could create embarrassment on an international stage. Because of this, every detail mattered. Their days were built upon careful planning, precise timing, and constant awareness of the needs of others. Historians often describe palaces as places filled with luxury, but surviving letters tell a more balanced story. Behind the glittering chandeliers and polished marble floors stood people carrying ordinary emotions. Queens worried about their children, feared political instability, mourned family members, and sometimes simply longed for a peaceful conversation away from public attention. During such moments, ladies-in-waiting became something no official advisor could replace. They listened without judgment, offered practical comfort, and understood that not every problem could be solved by power alone. Their quiet presence often provided stability during the most difficult periods of royal life. Some remained faithful until the very end of their lives, serving elderly queens whose reigns had lasted for decades. Others witnessed the final days of ancient monarchies as revolutions reshaped Europe forever. They packed treasured family heirlooms, protected personal letters, and accompanied royal families into uncertain futures, demonstrating that loyalty sometimes meant leaving behind everything familiar. Although many of their names have faded from memory, traces of their lives remain hidden within diaries, portraits, household records, and carefully preserved correspondence. Piece by piece, these forgotten voices continue to help historians rebuild a more complete picture of palace life. They remind us that history is never created, only by the people standing in the brightest light. It is also shaped by those who quietly support others with patience, wisdom, kindness, and unwavering dedication. The crowns displayed in museums may capture our attention first, but the stories of the women who stood faithfully beside those crowns reveal a different kind of greatness, one measured not by authority or fame, but by a lifetime of trust, service, and quiet courage that echoed through generations, long after the palace doors had finally closed. As historians continue to study royal archives, more forgotten stories of ladies-in-waiting are still being uncovered, hidden inside old chests, dusty libraries, and carefully preserved collections are handwritten letters, household account books, invitation lists, and personal journals that survived for hundreds of years. At first glance, these documents may appear ordinary, but together they reveal the rhythm of everyday life inside the world's most famous palaces. A note requesting a particular dress for an upcoming ceremony, a shopping list for medicine, or a short diary entry describing heavy rain on the morning of a royal wedding can suddenly make distant history feel surprisingly alive. These small details remind us that behind every magnificent portrait stood real people living ordinary days filled with responsibility, hope, disappointment, and quiet determination. Modern researchers often find themselves fascinated not by dramatic battles or royal decrees, but by these gentle glimpses into daily life. Through them, we learn how early mornings began, how long journeys were prepared, what foods were served during ordinary evenings, and how deeply the ladies-in-waiting cared for the women they served. We also discover that many queens relied on familiar faces during difficult times far more than they relied on powerful ministers. A trusted companion who had stood beside the queen for 20 or 30 years, understood her habits, fears, and hopes in ways that few others possibly could. That relationship, built slowly through countless ordinary days, became one of the strongest foundations of palace life. Even when historians cannot recover every name or every story, the surviving evidence paints a remarkably clear picture. These women were intelligent, disciplined, adaptable, and remarkably resilient. They balanced strict etiquette with genuine compassion, maintaining perfect composure even when the royal household faced uncertainty or tragedy. Their success depended not upon public speeches or military victories, but upon countless quiet decisions made every single day. They organized, remembered, comforted, advised, protected, and supported without expecting history to reward them with lasting fame. In many ways, they represented the unseen strength behind the glittering image of monarchy itself. Today, as visitors walk through restored castles and admire magnificent throne rooms, it is worth remembering that these silent halls were once filled with the footsteps of women whose devotion helped shape generations of royal history. Their voices may have faded with time, but their influence remains woven into every corridor, every chamber, and every story of the queens who could never have carried the weight of the crown entirely alone. Eventually, the passing of time transformed many of the great royal courts into museums, cultural landmarks, or symbols of national history. But the legacy of the ladies-in-waiting continued to live within their walls. Visitors today often admire magnificent staircases, glittering ballrooms, and richly decorated royal apartments, imagining the grand ceremonies that once filled these spaces. Yet far fewer people stop to consider the quiet figures who walked those same corridors every day, carrying letters, arranging gowns, preparing audiences, or simply offering a reassuring smile to a nervous queen before an important event. Their lives remind us that history is built not only from extraordinary moments, but also from thousands of ordinary acts performed with remarkable dedication. Imagine the sound of soft footsteps echoing through a peaceful palace before dawn. A fire has just been lit in the queen's private chamber. Candles flicker gently against painted walls, and outside the windows the gardens remain covered in morning mist. Before the kingdom fully awakens, the ladies-in-waiting have already begun their work. One carefully folds elegant dresses, another reviews the day's schedule, while another quietly places fresh flowers in the room. None of these tasks seem dramatic on their own, yet together they create the calm and order expected within a royal household. Their success depended upon making every difficult task appear effortless. If everything unfolded perfectly, few people noticed their work at all. That quiet invisibility was often considered the greatest compliment they could receive. Looking back across centuries, it becomes clear that these women represented a rare combination of loyalty, intelligence, patience, and discretion. They stood close enough to witness some of history's most important decisions, while remaining respectful enough to let others stand in the spotlight. They experienced coronations, royal weddings, diplomatic negotiations, births, celebrations, illnesses, and farewells, all while faithfully performing responsibilities that demanded both emotional strength and practical skill. Although many of their names have been forgotten, their influence survives through the queens they supported and the traditions they helped preserve. Every carefully written letter, every restored portrait, and every surviving diary adds another small piece to their remarkable story. Together, these fragments remind us that behind every famous monarch stood individuals whose devotion rarely appeared in official histories, but whose presence quietly shaped the course of royal life. Their legacy is one of gentle service rather than personal glory, proving that some of history's greatest contributions are made not by those who wear the crown, but by those who faithfully help carry its weight day after day, year after year in silence. Even after the age of magnificent royal courts had largely passed, the image of the lady-in-waiting never completely disappeared. Novelists, filmmakers, and historians continued to be fascinated by these women because they occupied a unique place in history. They were close enough to witness events that changed nations, yet distant enough from official power to observe them with remarkable honesty. Unlike kings, queens, or ministers, they often had little reason to exaggerate their achievements. Their surviving journals describe ordinary mornings, unexpected conversations, quiet worries, and small moments of happiness that official records rarely considered important. These personal accounts allow us to see royal life through human eyes, rather than through the formal language of state documents. We discover that queens sometimes laughed over simple jokes, worried about the health of their children, became anxious before public ceremonies, or found comfort during peaceful evenings spent reading beside a fireplace. Standing nearby through all these moments were the ladies-in-waiting, whose greatest gift was often their steady presence, rather than dramatic action. They understood when to speak and when silence offered greater comfort. They knew when encouragement was needed and when respectful distance was the wiser choice. Such emotional intelligence could not be learned from books alone. It developed over years of shared experiences, mutual trust, and quiet observation. Their loyalty was tested repeatedly by changing rulers, political disagreements, family tragedies, and uncertain futures. Yet many remained faithful despite receiving little recognition beyond the gratitude of the royal family itself. That quiet dedication became the true measure of their character. Today, historians increasingly recognize that understanding palace life requires looking beyond the throne itself. The daily routines, traditions, and relationships that sustained royal households depended upon countless individuals working together, and among the most important were these trusted companions. Every carefully arranged ceremony, every successful diplomatic reception, and every calm response during moments of crisis reflected the dedication of people whose names were often omitted from history books. As museums continue restoring ancient castles and researchers uncover forgotten letters hidden in archives, the voices of these remarkable women slowly return to us across the centuries. They remind us that greatness is not always found in commanding armies or wearing jeweled crowns. Sometimes it is found in faithfully serving others with kindness, wisdom, patience, and integrity through an entire lifetime. In remembering the ladies in waiting, we gain a fuller understanding not only of queens and kingdoms, but also of the quiet human relationships that supported them. Their stories encourage us to appreciate those whose contributions remain unseen, proving that history is often carried forward by gentle hands, working quietly behind the scenes while the world looks somewhere else. In many ways, the story of the ladies in waiting is also the story of how history remembers some people while quietly forgetting others. The names of kings and queens are carved into monuments, printed in textbooks, and repeated for generations. Their portraits hang in magnificent galleries, and their decisions are studied by historians around the world. Yet standing only a few steps away in countless paintings are women whose lives were equally filled with responsibility, sacrifice, and devotion. Most visitors glance past them without ever wondering who they were or why they stood so close to the throne. That quiet anonymity became part of their legacy. They accepted that their purpose was not to become famous, but to help someone else fulfill an extraordinary role. Their reward came not through public applause, but through the trust placed in them every single day. Such trust could never be demanded. It had to be earned slowly through years of honesty, reliability, and careful judgment. A queen who placed her confidence in a lady-in-waiting expected complete discretion. Personal letters, private conversations, family disagreements, and moments of weakness remained safely protected because these women understood that loyalty extended far beyond official duties. Even after leaving court, many continued guarding those memories for the rest of their lives. This remarkable sense of honor explains why historians sometimes struggle to reconstruct their stories. They simply did their work so well that they left very little evidence behind. The silence they preserved became part of history itself. Yet what survives is enough to reveal extraordinary character. Their diaries speak of long days filled with endless responsibilities, but they also describe peaceful walks through palace gardens, the changing seasons beyond castle windows, music drifting softly through grand halls, and evenings spent reading beside warm fireplaces after demanding ceremonies had finally ended. These quiet moments remind us that life inside a palace was not an endless procession of celebrations. It was a place where ordinary routines unfolded within extraordinary surroundings. There were birthdays to remember, clothing to mend, guests to welcome, children to comfort, and unexpected problems to solve before anyone else became aware of them. Through patience and experience, the ladies-in-waiting created stability within a world that often seemed uncertain. As we slowly bring their story to a close, perhaps the greatest lesson they leave behind is that history is shaped not only by those who make the loudest decisions, but also by those who faithfully support others with humility and grace. Their lives prove that kindness, discretion, and quiet dedication can influence generations without ever demanding recognition, leaving behind a legacy that continues to inspire all who choose to look beyond the glittering crown and notice the faithful companions standing quietly beside it. As we reflect on the lives of these remarkable women, it is worth imagining one final ordinary day inside a royal palace. The sun rises slowly over the castle towers, golden light reaching the windows of rooms that have witnessed generations of history. Servants quietly begin their work, guards change positions at the gates, and somewhere in the royal apartments, a lady-in-waiting gently opens the curtains to welcome a new morning. She already knows the day's schedule by heart. Diplomatic meetings, charitable visits, religious services, family meals, and evening receptions have all been carefully planned. Before the Queen even asks, everything has already been prepared. This ability to anticipate another person's needs became one of the defining qualities of the role. It was not simply about following instructions, but about understanding someone so completely that assistance could be offered before it was requested. Such awareness developed only through years of shared experiences. Some ladies-in-waiting served a single queen for 30 or 40 years, remaining beside her through youth, middle age, and old age. Together they watched children grow into adults, celebrated marriages, welcomed grandchildren, and mourned the passing of loved ones. Their relationship often became deeper than many official titles could ever express. While politics changed and ministers came and went, these loyal companions remained a steady presence in a constantly changing world. Historians now recognize that many royal households depended just as much upon trusted relationships as they did upon formal institutions. A well-organized palace did not function because of wealth alone. It functioned because dependable people carried out countless responsibilities with precision every single day. The ladies-in-waiting represented that quiet professionalism. They combined elegance with discipline, kindness with discretion, and compassion with unwavering loyalty. Their influence was rarely dramatic, yet it was constant, shaping the atmosphere of the court through patience rather than authority. When modern visitors admire magnificent crowns displayed behind museum glass, it is easy to think only about the monarch who once wore them. Yet every crown was placed upon a ruler who relied on the support of many unseen individuals. Among the most devoted were the ladies-in-waiting, whose careful work helped preserve order during both peaceful years and uncertain times. Though their footsteps have long faded from marble floors and their voices have become whispers, carried only through surviving letters and diaries, their legacy continues to remind us that true greatness is often found in quiet acts of service, performed with humility, wisdom, and steadfast devotion. Long after ceremonies ended and palace doors finally closed each evening, their dedication remained one of the invisible foundations upon which royal life quietly rested for centuries. There is one final truth that quietly emerges from the story of the ladies-in-waiting. Their lives remind us that history is not only made in throne rooms during dramatic announcements or on battlefields where armies collide. More often, history grows through ordinary days repeated with extraordinary care. Every carefully folded gown, every handwritten letter delivered on time, every comforting word offered during a difficult evening, and every promise faithfully kept became part of the unseen foundation that supported an entire monarchy. These women rarely expected monuments to be built in their honor. They understood that their purpose was to help others shine, even if they themselves remained in the background. That quiet humility is perhaps the most remarkable part of their story. In today's world, where recognition is often measured by fame and public attention, the lives of the ladies-in-waiting offer a very different lesson. They demonstrate that genuine influence does not always require standing in the center of the room. Sometimes the greatest difference is made by those who patiently organize, encourage, protect, and support without asking for praise in return. Their loyalty was not performed for an audience. It was revealed through countless decisions made when no one else was watching. If a queen awoke to a perfectly prepared morning, if an important ceremony unfolded without confusion, or if a frightened royal child found comfort during uncertain times, then the ladies-in-waiting had quietly succeeded in their mission. As centuries passed, kingdoms rose and fell, castles changed owners, and many royal traditions slowly disappeared. Yet the values these women represented never lost their importance. Trust, discretion, compassion, patience, and unwavering dedication remain qualities admired in every generation. The magnificent palaces that still stand across Europe continue to attract millions of visitors each year. People admire glittering chandeliers, priceless paintings, and magnificent gardens, but hidden behind every beautiful room is the memory of ordinary people who devoted their lives to serving others with dignity. Among them were the ladies-in-waiting, whose gentle footsteps once echoed through silent corridors, long before visitors filled those halls. Their names may not appear in every history book, but their quiet presence helped shape the daily lives of queens whose decisions influenced nations. By remembering them, we gain a richer understanding of the past, one that reaches beyond crowns and ceremonies to reveal the human relationships that truly sustained royal life. And perhaps as the palace grows quiet once more and the candles slowly burn lower, we can leave these forgotten companions exactly as history often found them, walking calmly through peaceful corridors, carrying out one final act of kindness before another ordinary day inside the royal court gently comes to an end. As the final pages of this story gently come into view, it becomes easier to understand why. Historians continue searching for the forgotten voices of the ladies-in-waiting. Their lives rarely contained the dramatic victories or famous speeches that usually fill history books, yet they experienced something equally extraordinary. They witnessed history from only a few steps away. They saw the expressions on a queen's face before a coronation, heard the silence after difficult news arrived from distant battlefields, and shared quiet conversations that were never meant for the outside world. Those private moments often revealed more about the true nature of royalty than any official ceremony ever could. Behind every jeweled crown stood an ordinary human being carrying hopes, fears, disappointments, and responsibilities that few could fully understand. The ladies-in-waiting were among the very few people allowed to see that hidden side. Their greatest gift was not simply helping with daily tasks, but creating an atmosphere of trust, where a queen could briefly set aside the weight of the crown and simply be herself. That privilege came only after years of faithful service and unquestioned loyalty. Even when they disagreed with decisions or witnessed painful events, they remained discreet, believing that honor was measured by the promises one kept rather than the recognition one received. As generations passed, their names slowly disappeared from public memory, but their influence remained woven into the traditions they preserved and the families they supported. Today, when we read their surviving letters or stand inside the palaces where they once walked, it becomes possible to imagine the quiet rhythm of their lives. We can almost hear the soft rustle of silk dresses along polished corridors, the distant sound of church bells echoing across palace gardens, and the gentle conversations held beside candlelight after the formal duties of the day had ended. These images remind us that history is not only a collection of dates and rulers, but also a tapestry of countless unseen lives connected through kindness, duty, and perseverance. The ladies in waiting may never have ruled kingdoms, commanded armies, or signed famous treaties, yet they offered something equally enduring, steady support during moments when it mattered most. Their story encourages us to look beyond the obvious heroes of the past and appreciate the quiet strength of those who devoted themselves to serving others with grace and humility. In doing so, they left behind a legacy that cannot always be measured by monuments or titles, but by the trust they earned, the comfort they provided, and the lasting impression they left upon the hearts of the queens who depended on them every single day. Perhaps the greatest gift left behind by the ladies in waiting is not a collection of royal treasures or magnificent buildings, but a deeper understanding of the people who lived within those walls. History often presents monarchs as distant figures wrapped in ceremony, yet the stories of these faithful companions reveal something much more personal. They remind us that even the most powerful rulers experienced loneliness, uncertainty, joy, and sorrow just like everyone else. A queen might spend the morning greeting foreign ambassadors with perfect confidence, then later sit quietly beside a window worrying about a son fighting in a distant war or a daughter preparing to leave home through marriage. During such moments, titles and crowns mattered far less than the comforting presence of someone who understood her without explanation. The ladies in waiting became that quiet source of reassurance. Their greatest achievements were rarely recorded because they often prevented problems before they could ever become visible. Misunderstanding between noble families was settled through careful conversation. A nervous guest was welcomed with kindness. A frightened child was calmed before an important ceremony. A grieving queen found someone willing to sit beside her in silence when words offered little comfort. These simple acts rarely changed history in dramatic ways, yet together they created stability within households that carried the hopes of entire kingdoms. Looking across the centuries, we can see that their influence reached far beyond palace walls. The values they embodied, patience, loyalty, discretion, humility, and compassion, remain just as meaningful today as they were hundreds of years ago. Modern life may be very different from the world of castles and royal courts, but the importance of trustworthy companionship has never disappeared. Every generation depends upon people willing to support others, without demanding recognition in return. In that sense, the legacy of the ladies in waiting continues long after the courts themselves have faded into history. Their lives encourage us to notice the quiet contributors, whose work often goes unseen but whose dedication makes extraordinary things possible. As historians uncover more forgotten journals, carefully preserved letters, and fading portraits, the picture becomes increasingly clear. These women were never simply background figures standing behind magnificent queens. They were intelligent observers, devoted friends, skilled organizers, and steady companions whose quiet strength helped royal families endure both celebration and hardship. Although the echoes of their footsteps have long disappeared from palace corridors, their example still invites us to look beyond fame and power, reminding us that true greatness is often found in lives lived with integrity, kindness, and unwavering devotion to others, even when history whispers their names instead of speaking them aloud. As our journey through the royal courts slowly reaches its quiet conclusion, one final image remained. Imagine walking through an ancient palace long after the crowds have gone home. The grand reception halls are silent, The polished floors reflect the fading light of evening, and the portraits of kings and queens watch over empty corridors that once echoed with conversation and ceremony. It is easy to imagine the famous rulers who lived there, yet with a little more thought, another picture begins to appear. A lady in waiting quietly closes a heavy wooden door after ensuring that everything is prepared for the next morning. Another carefully folds an embroidered gown that took months to create. Someone else places a handwritten letter onto a polished desk, so the queen will find it when she awakens. These small moments were repeated day after day, year after year, becoming part of the invisible rhythm that kept royal life running smoothly. History often remembers the extraordinary occasions, a magnificent coronation, a royal wedding, or the signing of an important treaty, but those unforgettable events depended upon countless ordinary tasks, completed with remarkable precision. Behind every successful ceremony stood people whose names rarely appeared in official records. Among the most devoted were the ladies-in-waiting, whose patience and careful attention transformed complicated responsibilities into effortless routines. They rarely expected rewards beyond the knowledge that they had served faithfully. Even when age eventually forced them to leave the palace, many carried those memories for the rest of their lives. Some returned to quiet country estates, others entered religious communities, while a few remained respected advisors to younger members of the royal family. Wherever life carried them, they took with them decades of experience that few people could ever fully understand. They had witnessed history not from a distant balcony, but from only a few steps away, sharing in moments of celebration, uncertainty, triumph, and sorrow. Their stories remind us that every great institution depends not only upon leaders, but also upon loyal individuals whose dedication remains unseen. Without them, even the most magnificent palace could never truly function as intended. Today, as historians continue uncovering forgotten diaries, carefully preserved correspondence, and overlooked household records, the voices of these remarkable women slowly become clearer. They invite us to see the past through gentler eyes, recognizing that kindness, reliability, discretion, and compassion possess a quiet power that can endure for centuries, long after jeweled crowns have been placed behind museum glass and royal. Ceremonies have become distant memories. The example set by the ladies-in-waiting continues to whisper across history, reminding us that a life devoted to helping others may leave one of the most meaningful legacies of all, even when that legacy is carried not by fame, but by quiet remembrance passed from one generation to the next. As historians piece together the final fragments of these forgotten lives, a quiet realization begins to emerge. The ladies-in-waiting were never simply observers of history. They became part of its fabric. They watched children who would one day become kings and queens take their first uncertain steps through palace corridors. They witnessed young princesses transform into confident rulers, and they remained beside aging monarchs, whose once energetic lives slowly gave way to quieter days. Few people experienced such a complete view of an entire reign. They saw the hopeful beginning, the difficult middle years filled with challenges, and the peaceful reflections that often came near the end. This unique perspective gave them a deep understanding of human nature. They learned that power could bring comfort but never remove sorrow, that wealth could fill magnificent rooms without guaranteeing happiness, and that even those who wore crowns depended upon loyalty, friendship, and compassion. These lessons were not written in official law books, but discovered through ordinary experiences repeated across many years. Every sunrise inside the palace brought another opportunity to serve with patience and dignity. Every evening closed with the satisfaction of knowing that another demanding day had passed without unnecessary conflict or confusion. It was quiet work, but it carried immense value. Today, when visitors admire royal portraits hanging in grand galleries, they often focus upon the richly dressed monarch standing proudly at the center of the painting. Yet, somewhere nearby, perhaps only partially visible in the background, stands a woman whose presence once brought calm to moments of uncertainty. She may not be identified by name, and few people pause to ask about her story. Still, without women like her, many royal households would have struggled to maintain the order and stability expected of them. Their greatest achievement was creating an environment where queens could concentrate on the enormous responsibilities placed upon their shoulders. Through thoughtful preparation, careful organization, wise advice, and unwavering discretion, they quietly carried part of that burden themselves. Although centuries have passed since many of them walked through those magnificent halls, their example continues to speak softly to us. It reminds us that true honor is not always found in titles or public recognition, but in faithfully fulfilling one's responsibilities with kindness, humility, and integrity. The ladies in waiting may never have ruled kingdoms, but they helped sustain them through countless unseen acts of devotion. In remembering their lives, we gain a richer appreciation not only for royal history, but also for the enduring importance of those who choose service over glory, proving that the strongest foundations are often built by hands that history almost forgot. There is also something surprisingly timeless about their story. While castles, royal titles, and court ceremonies may seem far removed from modern life, the qualities that define the ladies in waiting remain just as meaningful today. They understood the importance of keeping a promise, offering support without expecting praise, and remaining calm when others became overwhelmed. They proved that trust is built through thousands of small actions rather than a single dramatic moment. Every day they earned the confidence of the people around them by being dependable, thoughtful, and discreet. These simple virtues allowed them to stand beside some of the most powerful women in history for decades at a time. Few professions demanded such complete loyalty. They could never allow personal ambition to overshadow their duty, nor could they reveal private conversations for their own advantage. Their reputation depended entirely upon integrity, and once that trust was broken, it could rarely be restored. Because of this, many ladies in waiting became examples of quiet professionalism, long before the modern world ever used such a phrase. They understood that true service often meant placing another person's needs before their own. Even during moments of celebration, they remained focused on making sure every detail unfolded perfectly rather than enjoying the attention themselves. Their satisfaction came from seeing the royal household function peacefully and efficiently. As years turned into decades, the palace itself became a witness to their dedication. The same stone staircases they climbed each morning, the same gardens where they accompanied the queen on peaceful walks, and the same grand halls where they welcomed visiting dignitaries slowly became filled with memories, invisible to everyone else. Every familiar room carried echoes of conversations, laughter, worries, and quiet acts of kindness that history never recorded. Those unseen memories were just as real as the famous ceremonies remembered by the world. Perhaps that is why their story continues to fascinate historians today. It reminds us that behind every great institution stand ordinary people performing extraordinary acts of dedication without seeking recognition. Their names may fade from memory, but their influence remains woven into the lives they touched. In the end, the ladies in waiting leave us with a gentle lesson that reaches far beyond the walls of any palace. Lasting greatness is not always measured by crowns, titles, or monuments. More often it is found in loyalty that never wavers, kindness that expects nothing in return, and quiet service carried out faithfully day after day. Those simple acts may never appear in grand history books, yet they shape lives in ways that endure long after the brightest jewels have lost Their shine and the grandest royal ceremonies have become distant memories. Over time, many of the customs once practiced by ladies-in-waiting disappeared, yet traces of their world can still be found in royal traditions that survive today. During state banquets, coronations, weddings, and official ceremonies, careful attention is still given to etiquette, appearance, and protocol. Although modern royal households rely on professional staff with different titles, the principle remains familiar. Behind every successful public appearance stands a dedicated team working quietly out of sight. In centuries past, many of those responsibilities belonged to the ladies-in-waiting. Their experience taught them that perfection was rarely achieved through luck. It came from careful preparation, patience, and an eye for the smallest details. They noticed if a ribbon had been tied incorrectly, if a document was missing, or if a nervous guest needed a reassuring smile before entering a crowded hall. These tiny observations prevented countless problems before anyone else became aware of them. Such work demanded constant attention and genuine care. Historians sometimes compare them to the invisible threads woven into a magnificent tapestry. At first glance, the colorful image captures all the attention, but without the hidden threads holding everything together, the entire work would slowly unravel. The ladies-in-waiting played a similar role within royal households. Their names may have remained hidden, yet their efforts supported the daily rhythm of palace life for generations. Looking through surviving correspondence, one detail appears again and again. Queens often thank these women not for extraordinary achievements, but for simple acts of loyalty. A comforting conversation after disappointing news, faithful companionship during long journeys, or quiet support during periods of illness meant more than expensive gifts or formal titles ever could. Those moments reveal that genuine friendship sometimes flourished even within the strict world of royal ceremony. It is a reminder that beneath layers of silk, jewels, and tradition were ordinary people searching for understanding and kindness. As modern readers, we may never fully experience the atmosphere of those ancient courts. Yet the surviving stories allow us to come remarkably close. We can picture candlelight reflecting from polished wooden floors, hear distant church bells beyond palace walls, and imagine gentle conversations carried through quiet galleries as another day slowly comes to an end. Through these images, the ladies-in-waiting step out from the shadows of history and become real once again. They were not merely figures standing behind a throne. They were trusted companions, patient advisors, careful organizers, and loyal friends whose lives remind us that the strongest influence is often exercised quietly. Even after centuries have passed, their example continues to encourage us to value humility, reliability, and compassion, proving that the people history remembers least can sometimes teach us the greatest lessons of all. Perhaps that is why, even after hundreds of years, people continue returning to these stories. We are naturally drawn to famous rulers, glittering crowns, and magnificent castles. But sooner or later, curiosity leads us toward the quieter figures standing just beyond the spotlight. The ladies-in-waiting represent an important reminder that every great chapter of history contains countless individuals whose names were never carved into marble monuments. Their influence was measured not through public speeches or military victories, but through consistency, loyalty, and quiet wisdom. Every morning they chose responsibility over comfort, placing the needs of the royal household before their own. Every evening they ended another demanding day knowing that tomorrow would require the same patience and dedication all over again. Such devotion was not extraordinary because it happened once. It became extraordinary because it continued for years, sometimes even decades. Imagine how many seasons they watched pass through palace windows. They saw spring gardens bloom beneath castle walls, listened to summer celebrations fill royal courtyards with music, watched autumn leaves cover long pathways where queens took peaceful walks, and endured long winters while snow quietly settled across ancient rooftops. Through all those changing seasons, their responsibilities remained remarkably steady. New rulers arrived, children grew into adults, fashions changed, and kingdoms faced both prosperity and hardship. Yet the ladies-in-waiting adapted with calm determination. They understood that serving faithfully often required accepting change without losing one's sense of duty. This ability to remain steady during uncertain times became one of their greatest strengths. Today, when historians restore forgotten manuscripts or carefully clean centuries-old portraits, they are not simply preserving beautiful objects. They are recovering fragments of lives that once seemed destined to disappear forever. Every restored diary, every preserved letter, and every carefully cataloged household record adds another voice to the story, allowing these remarkable women to emerge from history's shadows. Their legacy reminds us that kindness expressed quietly can outlast power, that trust earned patiently can survive generations, and that the greatest acts of service are often performed without expectation of reward. While the names of many ladies-in-waiting may never become widely known, the values they embodied continue speaking across the centuries. They encourage us to appreciate the unseen efforts that support families, communities, and institutions every single day. In the end, perhaps that is their most enduring gift. They teach us that history is not only shaped by those who stand upon the throne, but also by those who stand faithfully beside it, offering strength, compassion, wisdom, and unwavering loyalty through every triumph, every sorrow, and every ordinary day that quietly joins them together. There is another reason these women deserve to be remembered. They remind us that history is often far more complex than the simple stories told in school. It is tempting to imagine that kingdoms were guided only by kings, queens, and powerful advisors. Yet every royal decision was surrounded by a network of loyal individuals whose work made leadership possible. The ladies-in-waiting belonged to that unseen network. They were present during the quiet hours before important announcements, the tense moments before diplomatic meetings, and the peaceful evenings after celebrations had finally ended. They understood that greatness was rarely created in a single dramatic moment. Instead, it was built patiently through preparation, trust, and countless ordinary responsibilities carried out with care. Their lives also remind us that true influence does not always require authority. A kind word offered at the right time, wise advice shared in private, or simple companionship during a lonely evening could shape a queen's confidence far more than public praise ever could. These women became trusted because they listened more than they spoke, observed more than they judged, and served without expecting recognition. Even when history overlooked them, they continued fulfilling their duties with remarkable consistency. Looking across the centuries, we can almost picture another peaceful evening settling over the palace. The final guests have departed. Musicians have packed away their instruments, and long corridors grow quiet beneath the warm glow of candlelight. Outside the palace, gardens rest beneath the stars, while distant guards continue their watch. From the ancient walls, inside, the ladies-in-waiting complete the last tasks of the day. They arrange tomorrow's schedule, prepare clothing for the morning, ensure every letter is safely stored, and quietly wish one another a peaceful night before disappearing into the silence of the castle. It is an ordinary ending to an ordinary day, yet thousands of such days formed the foundation of royal life across generations. Those quiet routines, repeated with unwavering dedication, became part of history even though few people ever noticed them. Perhaps that is the most beautiful lesson their story leaves behind. A meaningful life is not measured only by public achievements or lasting fame. Sometimes it is measured by the number of people whose burdens become lighter because someone chose to help without asking for anything in return. The ladies in waiting lived according to that quiet principle. Though centuries have passed since their footsteps echoed through palace halls, their example still encourages us to value loyalty, humility, compassion, and steady service. In remembering them, we remember not only the forgotten women of the royal courts, but also the timeless truth that history is shaped just as much by quiet hearts as it is by famous names. As we continue this gentle journey through the forgotten corners of royal history, it becomes clear that the ladies-in-waiting left behind something more valuable than jewels or royal titles. They left behind an example of quiet character. In every generation, there are people whose names become famous, but there are also those whose kindness, patience, and loyalty quietly shape the lives of everyone around them. These women belong to the second group. They understood that serving with dignity required strength that could not always be seen. Remaining calm during moments of crisis, speaking honestly when advice was needed, and protecting another person's trust for an entire lifetime demanded extraordinary self-control. Their greatest victories were often invisible. A disagreement peacefully resolved before it became a scandal. A worried queen reassured before an important ceremony, or a frightened child comforted after waking from a nightmare were accomplishments that never appeared in official records. Yet they mattered deeply to the people who experienced them. When historians study royal households today, they increasingly recognize that these unseen moments were just as important as famous political events. A stable palace depended upon dependable relationships, and those relationships were strengthened every day through simple acts of care and responsibility. Imagine one final quiet evening inside a centuries-old castle. The candles burn lower, footsteps gradually disappear from the corridors, and the palace settles into peaceful silence. Beyond the windows, moonlight rests upon ancient towers that have watched generations come and go. Somewhere within those walls, a lady-in-waiting closes a diary after recording the day's events, folds tomorrow's clothing with practiced hands, and offers one last respectful bow before leaving the queen's chamber. She asks for no reward, expects no monument, and knows that tomorrow another day of faithful service will begin before sunrise. It is a peaceful image, yet it captures the heart of their remarkable lives. They prove that history is not sustained only by power, wealth, or ambition. It is sustained by ordinary people who choose responsibility over recognition and loyalty over personal glory. Although centuries separate us from their world, the values they live by remain surprisingly familiar. Trust still matters. Kindness still matters. Quiet dedication still matters. Perhaps that is why the story of the ladies-in-waiting continues to resonate even now. They remind us that behind every celebrated figure stand countless others, whose names may fade with time, but whose influence continues through the lives they touched. Their footsteps may no longer echo through palace corridors, yet the example they left behind still speaks softly across history, inviting us to remember that true greatness is often found not in being the center of attention, but in faithfully helping others carry the weight of their responsibilities with grace, compassion, and unwavering devotion. Yet even after exploring so many aspects of their lives, one question still remains. What did a lady-in-waiting hope for when her years of service finally came to an end? Unlike queens whose names were recorded in official histories, many of these women quietly returned to ordinary life. Some retired to peaceful country estates, where they spent their later years surrounded by family. Others entered convents, choosing a life of prayer and reflection after decades, inside the busy atmosphere of the royal court. A fortunate few remained close to the royal family, welcomed as respected friends whose loyalty had been proven over many years. Regardless of where life carried them, they left the palace with memories that no one else could ever fully share. They had watched history unfold from a place that very few people were privileged to stand. They remembered the excitement before royal weddings, the anxious silence before difficult political decisions, the joyful laughter of children running through palace gardens, and the quiet tears shed after moments of personal loss. Those memories stayed with them long after they removed their elegant court dresses for the final time. Some preserved these experiences by writing letters or journals, never imagining that centuries later historians would carefully study every page in search of forgotten voices. Others carried their memories only in their hearts, allowing them to disappear forever when their own lives came to an end. That is why every surviving diary feels so precious today. It offers a rare opportunity to see history not through the eyes of rulers, but through someone who lived beside them every single day. Reading those words reminds us that behind every royal ceremony stood ordinary mornings, filled with preparation, quiet conversations, and small acts of kindness. The palace was not only a stage for magnificent celebrations, it was also a home where people worried, laughed, hoped, and comforted one another just as families do everywhere. Perhaps this is the greatest reason the story of the ladies-in-waiting continues to captivate us. Their lives bridge the distance between legend and reality. They show us that beneath the glittering image of monarchy existed a deeply human world, sustained by trust, friendship, patience, and compassion. Without these faithful companions, many queens would have carried the burdens of the crown in far greater loneliness. Though their own names have often faded into the background of history, the quiet example they left behind remains surprisingly vivid. It reminds us that a meaningful life is not defined by applause or public recognition, but by the lasting difference we make in the lives of others through loyalty, humility, and unwavering care. As the centuries continue to drift farther into the past, the voices of the ladies-in-waiting become quieter. Yet they never disappear completely. Their stories survive in unexpected places, a faded signature at the bottom of a letter, a brief mention in a palace inventory, or a small portrait tucked into the corner of a gallery where most visitors hardly pause to look. To an ordinary observer, these details may seem insignificant, but to historians they are priceless clues. Each discovery adds another piece to a story that has remained incomplete for hundreds of years. Slowly, patiently, a clearer picture begins to emerge. These women were not merely attendants standing silently behind queens. They were educated, capable, and deeply trusted members of the royal household, whose daily efforts allowed the complicated machinery of court life to function smoothly. They understood that true responsibility often meant solving problems before anyone else even realized they existed. Their greatest success was measured by how peacefully the day unfolded. If ceremonies ended without confusion, if important guests departed satisfied, and if the queen retired each evening, knowing everything had been carefully arranged for tomorrow, then the ladies-in-waiting had fulfilled their purpose perfectly. Such achievements rarely earned applause, because they prevented difficulties rather than creating dramatic moments. Yet perhaps that quiet success is exactly what makes their story so remarkable. They demonstrated that lasting influence is often gentle, rather than loud. Today, when people visit the great palaces of Europe, they naturally admire glittering chandeliers, magnificent staircases, and beautifully decorated throne rooms. But if we pause for just a moment, it is possible to imagine another layer of history hidden beneath those polished floors. We can picture the soft sound of dresses moving through long corridors, the respectful greetings exchanged at sunrise, the careful preparation before grand ceremonies, and the peaceful conversations shared after the palace finally became quiet at night. Those invisible moments formed the true heartbeat of royal life. Without them, even the most magnificent palace would have felt empty. The ladies in waiting remind us that history is not sustained only by rulers making famous decisions, but also by ordinary people performing extraordinary acts of loyalty every single day. Their legacy encourages us to value patience over pride, service over recognition, and compassion over ambition. Long after crowns have been locked inside, museum displays and royal processions have become distant memories. The quiet example of these faithful companions continues to endure, gently reminding us that some of the greatest lives are lived not in search of glory, but in devoted service to others, one thoughtful act at a time. Eventually, the grand palaces themselves became storytellers. Their stone walls, towering windows, and endless corridors silently preserved memories long after the people who filled them had vanished. Every staircase climbed by a young princess, every doorway opened for a visiting ambassador, and every quiet chamber where a queen sought. A few moments of peace remained, standing as witnesses to centuries of human experience. Among all those memories were the unseen footsteps of the ladies in waiting, women who passed through these halls so often that they became part of the palace itself. They knew which floorboards creaked during the night, which windows caught the first light of dawn, and which gardens offered the queen a moment of calm away from the endless demands of court life. Their familiarity with these places transformed magnificent buildings into homes, filled with routine and comfort. To them, the palace was not simply a symbol of royal authority. It was the place where friendships were formed, difficult conversations unfolded, children laughed, and elderly monarchs reflected upon lives filled with responsibility. Looking through surviving architectural plans and household records, historians sometimes discover tiny rooms hidden behind grand apartments. These modest spaces were often used by trusted attendants who remained close enough to respond whenever they were needed. Such discoveries remind us that behind every richly decorated royal chamber existed an entire community working quietly to support daily life. The ladies in waiting belonged to that community, bridging the distance between formal ceremony and ordinary human experience. Their world was filled with routines that rarely changed. Morning preparations, afternoon audiences, evening receptions, and peaceful nights followed one another with reassuring regularity. Even when wars, political crises, or family tragedies disrupted the kingdom beyond the palace walls, these familiar routines offered stability to those living inside. That quiet consistency became one of the greatest gifts they could provide. Today, as restoration experts carefully preserve ancient castles for future generations, they do more than protect stone and wood. They also preserve the spaces where countless untold stories unfolded. Every restored corridor invites us to imagine the people who once walked there. And among the most fascinating are the women whose devotion rarely appeared in official portraits or royal proclamations. Though history often placed them in the background, they stood at the heart of everyday palace life, proving that true importance is not always measured by visibility. Their legacy survives not because they sought greatness, but because they practiced kindness, discipline, patience, and loyalty with remarkable consistency. In the quiet silence of those ancient halls, it is almost possible to imagine their gentle footsteps still echoing through time, reminding us that history is remembered not only through the rulers who changed nations, but also through the faithful companions who helped them carry the weight of every ordinary day. Even now, when millions of people visit Europe's famous castles each year, many unknowingly follow the very same paths once walked by the ladies in waiting. They admire the glittering throne rooms, stand beneath painted ceilings, and gaze out across gardens that have changed very little over the centuries. Yet the true life of these palaces was never found only in their magnificent architecture. It existed in the quiet routines that unfolded every single day. Before visitors arrived, before musicians played, and before royal ceremonies filled the halls with celebration, there were always people working quietly behind the scenes. Among the most trusted were the ladies-in-waiting, whose careful attention ensured that each day began and ended in perfect order. They knew that even the smallest detail could carry great importance. A forgotten letter, a delayed carriage, or an incorrectly arranged ceremony might create unnecessary confusion. By preventing such problems before they appeared, they allowed the royal household to move forward with calm confidence. Their greatest talent was often anticipation rather than reaction. They noticed what others overlooked and acted before difficulties became visible. This rare ability made them invaluable companions to queens who already carried enormous responsibilities. As years passed, these women also became living memories of the court itself. They remembered old traditions after others had forgotten them, recalled the names of people who had long since disappeared, and preserved customs that connected one generation of the royal family to the next. In many ways, they became guardians of continuity. While fashions changed, rulers came and went, and political ideas transformed Europe. The quiet discipline of their daily service remained remarkably constant. Historians now understand that these traditions helped create a sense of stability during uncertain times, offering comfort to royal families living through periods of dramatic change. Looking back today, it is impossible not to admire the patience required for such a life. Their work demanded intelligence without pride, confidence without arrogance, and loyalty without expectation of reward. They accepted that the greatest accomplishments might pass unnoticed, believing that faithful service possessed its own quiet dignity. Perhaps that is why their story continues to resonate centuries later. It reminds us that history is filled with people whose influence cannot always be measured by monuments or titles. Sometimes the strongest foundations are built by individuals whose names fade while their example endures. As evening once again settles over the ancient castles of Europe, the grand halls grow silent. Sunlight disappears from the palace windows, and another peaceful day comes to an end. Though the voices of the ladies-in-waiting have long since fallen silent, their quiet legacy remains woven into every corridor, every chamber, and every memory of the queens they faithfully served, leaving behind a timeless example of grace, devotion, and steadfast loyalty that continues to inspire anyone willing to look beyond the throne itself. As our quiet exploration continues, we may begin to notice something unexpected. The story of the ladies-in-waiting is not simply a story about royalty. It is also a story about the invisible work that allows great institutions to endure across generations. Every kingdom depended upon countless people performing their duties with care, but few carried as much responsibility while receiving so little recognition. The ladies-in-waiting accepted that reality with remarkable grace. They understood that their names might never appear in official chronicles, yet they continued serving with the same devotion day after day. Their sense of purpose came not from fame, but from knowing they had fulfilled their responsibilities with honesty and compassion. Imagine another peaceful morning inside a royal residence. The first rays of sunlight reach the palace gardens. Birds begin singing outside tall windows, and the household slowly awakens. Before the corridors fill with activity, a lady-in-waiting quietly reviews the day's schedule once more. Every audience, every formal dinner, every carriage departure, and every private meeting has already been carefully arranged. She checks that the Queen's correspondence has been placed neatly upon the writing desk, confirms that visitors have been announced correctly, and makes certain that nothing has been forgotten. These tasks may appear simple, Yet together they create the sense of order expected within a royal court. Such order was never accidental. It existed because dedicated people patiently worked behind the scenes long before anyone else arrived. Throughout history, moments of great celebration often receive the most attention, but it was the ordinary days between those celebrations that truly defined palace life. Most mornings were not filled with coronations or royal weddings. Instead, they were occupied by conversations, planning charitable duties, religious observances, family gatherings, and the countless small responsibilities that accompany any household. No matter how grand, the ladies-in-waiting stood at the center of those ordinary moments, ensuring that each unfolded with quiet dignity. Looking back today, perhaps the most lasting lesson they leave behind is that true leadership is never carried alone. Even the most admired queens depended upon trusted companions whose loyalty remained constant. Through years of change, the ladies-in-waiting offered more than practical assistance. They offered stability, understanding, and the comforting presence of someone who had shared both joyful celebrations and difficult trials. Their legacy reminds us that behind every famous figure stand people whose kindness, patience, and unwavering commitment quietly make greatness possible. Though history may remember the crown first, it is impossible to fully understand the life beneath it without also remembering the faithful women who walked beside it every single day, asking for nothing except the opportunity to serve with honor. And so, as evening settles over the palace one last time, the corridors grow quiet and the candles burn low. The grand ceremonies have ended, the visiting nobles have returned to their chambers, and the heavy wooden doors are gently closed until another morning arrives. Somewhere beyond the throne room, a lady-in-waiting completes her final duties for the day. She folds the queen's gown with practiced hands, places tomorrow's letters neatly upon the writing desk, and pauses for a brief moment to look. Through a window overlooking the peaceful gardens, the kingdom sleeps, unaware of the countless quiet tasks that have made another day pass. Without disorder, there are no crowds applauding her work, no official announcements praising her loyalty, and no monuments waiting to bear her name. Yet none of that was ever the reason she served. Her greatest reward was knowing that she had helped bring calm to a world filled with responsibility. For years, perhaps even decades, she offered wisdom without demanding attention, kindness without expecting gratitude, and unwavering loyalty without seeking recognition. In many ways, that quiet devotion became her greatest achievement. Long after rulers were buried, crowns inherited, and generations passed into history, the memory of such faithful service remained woven into the walls of the palace itself. Every polished staircase, every silent corridor, and every carefully tended garden carried traces of lives spent in dedication to others. Today, historians continue uncovering fragments of those forgotten stories, allowing us to remember the women who stood faithfully beside queens through triumph, uncertainty, celebration, and loss. Their legacy teaches us that history is not only shaped by those who wear crowns, but also by those who quietly support them with patience, compassion, and integrity. As we leave these ancient halls behind for now, we carry with us the gentle reminder that the brightest light in history is often supported by countless unseen hands working faithfully in the background. Their names may fade, but their example endures, whispering across the centuries that true greatness is found not in glory, but in a lifetime of humble and devoted service. Perhaps the greatest achievement of the ladies-in-waiting was that they made extraordinary responsibility appear completely ordinary. To those visiting the palace for only a single day, everything seemed effortless. Ceremonies began exactly on time. Distinguished guests were welcomed with flawless courtesy. Royal apartments were perfectly prepared, and every event unfolded with remarkable grace. Few outsiders ever realized how much careful planning stood behind that appearance of effortless perfection. Every successful day represented hundreds of thoughtful decisions made quietly by people who expected no applause. Among them, the ladies-in-waiting occupied a place of unique importance. They understood the personalities of everyone within the royal household, remembered traditions that stretched back generations, and knew how to bring calm to moments when uncertainty threatened to disturb the careful balance of court life. That knowledge could not be learned quickly. It was earned through years of observation, patience, and unwavering commitment. As time passed, these women became living bridges between different generations of the monarchy. A young princess might first know them as gentle companions during childhood, later rely upon them as trusted advisors after becoming queen, and eventually watch them guide the next generation with the same quiet wisdom. In this way, the ladies-in-waiting carried not only daily responsibilities, but also the memory of the royal household itself. They remembered old customs, family traditions, forgotten stories, and lessons learned from previous reigns. Their experience became a source of continuity during periods of great political and social change. Even when kingdoms faced uncertainty, these familiar routines helped preserve a sense of stability within palace walls. Today, as historians carefully compare letters, journals, portraits, and household records, they continue discovering new details that deepen our appreciation of these remarkable women. Each surviving document reminds us that history is made not only through famous victories or dramatic speeches, but also through quiet acts of reliability repeated day after day. The ladies-in-waiting rarely stood at the center of history, yet they helped support those who did. Their lives encourage us to look beyond crowns and ceremonies and recognize the lasting value of loyalty, humility, compassion, and faithful service. Perhaps that is why their story continues to endure. It reminds us that behind every celebrated figure are people whose steady presence makes greatness possible, proving that the strongest foundations are often built not by those seeking glory, but by those who quietly dedicate their lives to helping others with kindness and unwavering devotion. Although centuries have passed since many of these women lived, their influence can still be felt in the traditions that survive inside modern royal households, ceremonial processions, formal greetings, carefully planned state visits, and the quiet dignity expected during public appearances all reflect customs that evolved over hundreds of years. While today's royal courts operate very differently, they still depend upon trusted people working behind the scenes with the same dedication that once defined the ladies-in-waiting. Technology may have replaced handwritten correspondence with secure communications and horse-drawn carriages with motorcades, yet one thing has never changed. Every public moment depends upon countless private preparations, carried out by people whose names rarely appear in headlines. In that sense, the legacy of the ladies-in-waiting never truly disappeared. It simply adapted to a changing world. Their story also reminds us that history is filled with individuals who influenced events through quiet consistency rather than dramatic action. They rarely gave speeches, negotiated treaties, or commanded armies, but they created an atmosphere in which others could perform those responsibilities with confidence. Their calm presence helped transform uncertainty into stability, confusion into order, and loneliness into companionship. Those contributions cannot easily be measured, yet they shaped daily life inside royal palaces for generations. Looking through the surviving records, historians often notice how frequently queens described gratitude toward the women who remained faithfully beside them during life's most difficult moments. Whether facing illness, mourning the loss of loved ones, or preparing for ceremonies that carried enormous political importance, they found comfort in familiar faces whose loyalty had already been tested many times before. Trust built over decades became more valuable than any jewel locked inside the palace treasury. As evening gently settles once again over the ancient castles of Europe, it is easy to imagine the final glow of candlelight reflecting across polished wooden floors. The great halls fall silent, the palace gates close for the night, and another ordinary day quietly becomes part of history. Somewhere within those peaceful corridors, the memory of the ladies-in-waiting still lingers, not as famous rulers, remembered by every generation, but as faithful companions whose patience, wisdom, and kindness helped sustain the lives of queens through countless ordinary days. Their footsteps have faded, their voices have grown quiet, yet the example they left behind continues to endure, reminding us that history is often carried forward by those who choose service over recognition and devotion over personal glory, leaving behind a legacy far greater than they could ever have imagined. Even after everything we have explored, it is possible that the ladies-in-waiting themselves would have been surprised to know that people centuries later would still be interested in their lives. They never expected to become the subjects of books, documentaries, or historical research. Most believed they were simply fulfilling the responsibilities they had accepted many years earlier. Their days were filled with routines so familiar that they may have seemed almost ordinary to those living them. Yet history has a remarkable way of revealing the importance of ordinary lives. As scholars continue examining forgotten archives, they discover that these women quietly connected every part of palace life together. They understood the traditions of the past, while helping the royal family prepare for the future. They welcomed young princesses, entering court for the first time, and later comforted elderly queens reflecting upon long reigns that were nearing their end. Few people experienced such a complete picture of royal life from beginning to end. They witnessed moments of celebration when bells rang across the kingdom and joyful crowds gathered beyond the palace gates. They also witnessed quieter moments that never appeared in official paintings, when uncertainty filled the royal household or difficult news arrived from distant provinces. Through all of it, they remained calm, dependable, and respectful. Their greatest strength was not found in dramatic heroism, but in quiet endurance. They understood that every new day would bring fresh responsibilities, and they met each one with the same steady determination. Looking back now, perhaps the true legacy of the ladies-in-waiting lies in the example they left behind rather than the titles they held. They remind us that kindness, offered consistently, can become a source of strength for others. That loyalty practiced over many years creates bonds stronger than wealth, and that humility often leaves a deeper impression than ambition. The magnificent castles of Europe may continue attracting visitors because of their beauty, but hidden within those walls are stories of ordinary people whose quiet dedication made extraordinary lives possible. Among those stories, few are more touching than those of the ladies-in-waiting. Though history placed them just outside the brightest light, they never stopped supporting the people who stood within it. Their lives encourage us to look beyond the famous names engraved upon monuments, and instead appreciate the countless individuals whose faithful service shaped history without demanding recognition. In the peaceful silence of those ancient palaces, their memory still seems to linger, reminding us that the truest measure of a life is not how loudly it is remembered, but how deeply it touched the lives of others through patience, compassion, wisdom, and unwavering devotion. As our story gently draws nearer to its final chapters, it becomes clear that the ladies-in-waiting left behind more than memories, preserved in old castles and fading letters. They left behind a timeless example of quiet dedication that reaches far beyond the royal courts of Europe. Their lives remind us that history is often sustained by people who never expected to become famous while monarchs appeared before cheering crowds, signed important documents, and received the attention of chroniclers. These faithful women continued their work with the same calm, determination they had shown the day before. They understood that the strength of a kingdom was not measured only by armies or wealth, but also by the stability created through trust, order, and compassion within the royal household. Every carefully prepared audience, every successful journey, and every peaceful evening inside the palace reflected hundreds of small decisions made with patience and wisdom. The ladies-in-waiting rarely hurried, rarely sought attention, and rarely complained. They simply carried out their responsibilities with quiet confidence, knowing that excellence was found in consistency rather than spectacle. It is perhaps because of this humility that their stories feel so comforting today. They remind us that meaningful lives are often built through ordinary acts repeated faithfully over many years. A reassuring smile, a thoughtful conversation, careful preparation, or simply remaining beside someone during difficult times can leave a greater mark than grand displays of power. Historians continue discovering small fragments of these women's lives, and with every letter translated or diary restored, another voice returns from the silence of the past. Together, those voices reveal a world where loyalty was treasured above recognition, and character mattered more than applause. As we imagine the palace settling into another peaceful night, with moonlight falling across quiet gardens and ancient stone walls, it is easy to picture one final lady-in-waiting walking slowly through the silent corridors, making certain that everything is ready for the morning ahead. She asks for no praise because she believes her duty is reward enough. That gentle image perhaps captures the heart of their entire story. They lived not for glory, but for service. They sought not attention, but trust. And although the centuries have carried away their footsteps, the values they embodied continue to echo softly through history, reminding us that behind every crown stood loyal hearts whose quiet devotion helped shape the world in ways that are only now beginning to receive the recognition they have always deserved. With every generation that passes, the distance between us and the world of the royal courts grows a little greater. Yet the human emotions found within those walls remain surprisingly familiar. Love, loyalty, hope, fear, friendship, and quiet perseverance have never belonged to one century alone. They connect people across time, allowing us to understand lives lived hundreds of years before our own. The ladies-in-waiting remind us that beneath the elaborate ceremonies and magnificent architecture were ordinary individuals trying to do their best in extraordinary circumstances. They celebrated joyful occasions with genuine happiness, grieved beside those they loved, worried about uncertain futures, and found comfort in the familiar rhythm of daily responsibilities. Their world may have been decorated with velvet, silk, and gold, but their hearts carried many of the same emotions we recognize today. Perhaps that is why their stories continue to resonate. They reveal that history is not as distant as it sometimes appears. Behind every portrait hanging in a museum is a person who laughed, grew tired after long days, cherished trusted friends, and searched for moments of peace. The ladies-in-waiting stood close enough to witness all of those quiet realities without ever becoming the center of attention themselves. Their greatest gift was understanding that true service required both humility and strength. They accepted that many of their finest achievements would never be publicly acknowledged, yet they continued giving their very best because their sense of duty came from within rather than from the praise of others. In doing so, they created a legacy that has lasted far longer than they could ever have imagined. Today, as historians continue restoring forgotten manuscripts and preserving ancient palaces, they are also preserving the memory of these remarkable women. Every recovered diary, every carefully translated letter, and every restored portrait brings another forgotten voice back into the story of the past. Little by little, the silence surrounding the ladies-in-waiting grows quieter, replaced by a richer understanding of the lives they lived and the sacrifices they willingly made. Their story reminds us that history belongs not only to rulers whose names appear in every book, but also to the faithful companions who stood beside them through ordinary mornings and extraordinary events alike. As long as people continue searching the past with curiosity and compassion, the quiet legacy of the ladies-in-waiting will endure, encouraging future generations to recognize that some of history's greatest contributions were made by those who never asked to be remembered, yet whose kindness, wisdom, and steadfast devotion continue to illuminate the past with a gentle and enduring light. As historians continue uncovering forgotten corners of the past, they often discover that the smallest details tell the richest stories. A pressed flower hidden between the pages of a prayer book, a carefully folded ribbon tucked inside a wooden chest, or a short note thanking a loyal companion can reveal more about daily life than an official royal decree. For the ladies-in-waiting, these quiet traces became the legacy they never intended to leave behind. They did not write their journals expecting strangers centuries later to read them. They simply recorded the events of ordinary days, who visited the palace, how the queen was feeling, what the weather was like during a royal procession, or how peaceful the gardens looked after an evening rain. Yet those ordinary observations now allow historians to step beyond the formal image of monarchy and discover the living, breathing world hidden beneath it. Through these surviving fragments, the palace becomes more than a magnificent building. It becomes a home filled with familiar routines and recognizable emotions. We can almost imagine the gentle sound of pages turning as a lady-in-waiting reads aloud while the queen quietly embroiders beside a warm fireplace. We can picture the careful preparation before a state banquet, the whispered conversations in candle-lit corridors after guests have departed, and the peaceful silence that settles over the castle once the final lantern has been extinguished for the night. These scenes remind us that even the grandest royal residences were shaped by simple human habits repeated day after day. The ladies-in-waiting became guardians of those quiet traditions, preserving not only ceremony but also a sense of comfort and continuity. Their work rarely ended with spectacular moments. Instead, it was built from thousands of thoughtful actions that together created an atmosphere of trust and stability. Looking back now, perhaps their greatest contribution was proving that true. Strength often appears in its gentlest form. They supported without controlling, advised without demanding authority, and remained loyal without expecting reward. Such qualities rarely attract immediate attention, yet they endure far longer than passing fame. As time carries us farther away from the age of castles and queens, the story of the ladies-in-waiting continues to offer a timeless lesson. It reminds us that every generation depends upon quiet individuals whose kindness, reliability, and devotion help others flourish, though their names may remain hidden within dusty archives and forgotten manuscripts. Their example continues to shine softly through history, encouraging us to recognize that the most meaningful lives are often those lived not in pursuit of glory, but in faithful service to others, one ordinary day at a time. As the final echoes of palace life fade into the distance, we are left with something far more meaningful than a simple historical record. We are left with an appreciation for the countless unseen people whose quiet dedication allowed great institutions to survive for centuries. The ladies-in-waiting never ruled kingdoms, commanded armies, or negotiated famous treaties, yet their influence reached into the everyday lives of queens in ways that cannot easily be measured. They understood that leadership could be lonely, and that even the strongest ruler occasionally needed someone who would speak with honesty rather than flattery. They became trusted because they offered steadiness instead of ambition and compassion instead of personal gain. Every morning they greeted familiar responsibilities with the same calm determination, never knowing what challenges the day might bring. A royal birth could fill the palace with celebration, while unexpected political news could transform that same palace into a place of anxious silence before sunset. Through every change, they remained composed, quietly adapting to whatever circumstances required. That ability to remain dependable during uncertain times became one of their greatest strengths. It is no surprise that many queens valued their ladies-in-waiting as lifelong companions rather than merely members of the household. Together, they experienced decades of shared memories that no official document could ever fully capture. They watched seasons pass beyond palace windows, welcomed new generations into the royal family, and said farewell to others whose lives had come to an end. Those shared experiences created bonds stronger than formal titles or courtly traditions. Today, when visitors admire the beauty of Europe's historic castles, they often imagine the kings and queens who once lived there. Yet hidden within every grand staircase, every peaceful courtyard, and every candlelit chamber are the quiet stories of women whose faithful service helped transform magnificent buildings into functioning homes. Their lives remind us that history is rarely shaped by famous individuals alone. It is built day by day through the patience, wisdom, and reliability of ordinary people carrying extraordinary responsibilities with quiet grace. Perhaps that is why the story of the ladies-in-waiting continues to inspire modern readers. It encourages us to look beyond the glitter of crowns and ceremonies and notice the human relationships that truly sustained royal life. Their names may not appear in every history book, but their legacy remains woven into the fabric of every court they served. In remembering them, we remember that the strongest foundations are often invisible, created not through power or recognition, but through years of faithful service, gentle kindness, and unwavering loyalty that continue to echo softly across the centuries. And so our journey through the quiet world of the ladies-in-waiting finally comes to its gentle end. We began by opening the doors of magnificent palaces, believing we were about to learn only about queens and royal ceremony. Instead, we discovered a different kind of history, one written not by crowns alone, but by faithful hands working patiently behind them. These women rarely stood in the brightest light, yet they carried responsibilities that demanded intelligence, courage, compassion, and extraordinary self-discipline. They witnessed history unfold from only a few steps away, preserving its most personal moments through loyalty rather than ambition. They celebrated joyful occasions, comforted grieving hearts, protected precious secrets, and quietly helped maintain the rhythm of royal life through countless ordinary days. Their greatest achievement was not becoming famous, but becoming trusted. In a world where power often shifted with politics and fortune changed without warning, trust became the most valuable treasure anyone could possess. The ladies-in-waiting earned that treasure through years of faithful service, proving that character is built not in a single heroic act, but through thousands of small choices made with honesty and kindness. As centuries passed, the kingdoms they served changed beyond recognition. Dynasties ended, castles became museums, and the echoes of royal ceremonies slowly faded into history. Yet the values these women embodied never disappeared. Loyalty still matters, patience still matters. Quiet compassion, careful listening, and dependable friendship remain as meaningful today as they were hundreds of years ago. Perhaps that is why their story continues to touch us. It reminds us that history belongs not only to the rulers whose names fill textbooks, but also to the countless people whose devotion quietly shaped the lives of others without ever asking for recognition. If we listen carefully, it almost feels as though the old palace corridors still remember them. The candles have burned low, the great halls are silent, and the moonlight rests softly upon ancient stone walls that have watched generations come and go. Somewhere within those peaceful corridors, the memory of a faithful lady-in-waiting lingers, not as a queen wearing a glittering crown, but as a gentle companion whose kindness made the burden of that crown a little easier to bear. And with that quiet image, we gently close the doors of the royal court, leaving behind a world of whispered conversations, timeless loyalty, and forgotten lives that deserve to be remembered. Thank you for spending this peaceful journey through history with me. And until our next story, may your evening be calm, your mind at ease, and your dreams carry you gently into another forgotten chapter of the past. Good night.